Hello guys, welcome back. Without wasting time, let's start with today's video.
Now we officially start Modern India, a history textbook for class 12. This is the first chapter, India in the 18th century, and like we saw in the syllabus, this is exclusively mentioned there in the syllabus. So we need to see the first chapter here, and then we'll go with all the chapters and try and complete the syllabus, linking the NCERT syllabus, question papers, and this book. See. The first is Decay of the Mughal Empire, Indian States and Society. And then when we were studying Aurangzeb in this last video of ours, we saw that after this Mughal Empire declined, there were separate states that came up. So who were they? Hyderabad, Carnatic, Bengal, Awadh, Mysore, Kerala, areas around Delhi, Pathans, Rohillas, Sikhs. Rise and fall of the Maratha power we'll see. So after Mughal started Maratha, but then we saw rise and fall of these also. Then social and economic conditions of the people at that point of time, and education and social and cultural life. Why is this important? Because there has been a question in UPSC 2014 where it said examine critically the various facets of economic policies of British in India from mid 18th century till independence. So in this we need to even mention the economic policies of the 18th century. So this portion, this subhead becomes important. So accordingly this chapter becomes important. So let's start with this chapter. The first topic starts with the decay of the Mughal Empire. So that means all the declining portion, the successors who were weak and couldn't arrange themselves, is what this chapter, this portion is about. And that is why we've completed the Mughal, so that we don't have to start from the very start. See, up to here, we just have how this end Mughal, see the tragedy of the decline of the Mughal Empire and everything. So now we know that this much is everything about Mughals. So this 5 pages of this first chapter. Then we have Indian States and Society. And from here starts breakups of all the different states and the Hyderabad, and then you have Bengal, Awadh, and the different ways in which different states started. So the first point that we need to see is decline of the Mughals, that we'll see today. So see, after Aurangzeb's death, the next ruler came up as Bahadur Shah. After Bahadur Shah, there are points I hear about Bahadur Shah, what was his way of looking into the world and what were his methods and everything. See, so this was all about him, and then it came Bahadur Shah was groping towards a solution to the problems and everything, and after that came Jahandar Shah. So after Aurangzeb was Bahadur Shah, and after him was Jahandar Shah. Jahandar Shah was weak, degenerate prince again. So after that, even he started facing problems, and in his place there were a lot more things that we need to see. After that came Farrukhsiyar. Farrukhsiyar is an important element. Why? Because we'll see that he gave one special firman that acted like the Magna Carta of India for the British India. So Farrukhsiyar is an important role player in that sense. And after that, in Farrukhsiyar we had the Said brothers controversy, and after Farrukhsiyar came Mohammed Shah. And after Mohammed Shah, we see the story of Mohammed Shah, all of the things here, and his issues, his good place, his good name, his efforts and his contributions and everything. And after that came Shah Alam II. Shah Alam II was the end, I would say, the end, because this Shah Alam II had signed the Treaty of Allahabad in the Battle of Buxar. See, at Allahabad, Battle of Buxar, and this finally gave way to the British India. And then the end was in 1857 when Bahadur Shah Zafar was deported to Rangoon. This ended the Mughal Empire. So now we need to see again the what, when, how and why concept. So now we need to see why did these Mughals decline? What was the reason? There were a lot of factors, not just a weak successors, but a lot more than that. So let's look into the chapter and the book all together. See, I've written down some basic notes of mine so that we covered everything in a very good gist. See, decline of the Mughal Empire. What the first point that I've written is the Aurangzeb's religious policy. We all saw what was his policy. He never kept up with Marathas. So Aurangzeb's religious policies and Deccan policies were an issue. Then came no rulers of accession. There were hardly any rulers. See, recurrent wars of succession was there. We saw it in Shah Jahan's time only when his 4 sons started war with that, and from there came the same concept. Then we have unworthy rulers, autocratic rule. If you talk about Bahadur Shah, Jahandar Shah, if you talk about Farrukh Shiar, everywhere you'll see that yes, there were unworthy rulers, autocratic rule. Then is rise of Sayyid brothers. If you see the internal politics, the corruption inside during Farrukh Shiar, during Mohammed Shah, you'll find that yes, this can be a reason for the decline of the Mughal rule. Then you also have rise of Marathas. This rise also gave an option to Mughals to sideline, and since the successors were so weak that they couldn't fight them, and thus ended the Mughal rule. These are the 4-5 points that I could collect, and we would go through the book and then we'll see what happens. See, in this chapter, Great Mughal Empire, how is it going? Mughal Emperor was reduced to the status of a mere pensioner of a foreign power. How? See, Bahadur Shah was learned, dignified. He had evidence of the reversal of some of the narrow-minded policies. However, he had a tolerant attitude also. There was no destruction of temples, and then he made an attempt to gain greater control over the Rajput states, and then he also made an attempt to garrison the cities of Amber and Jodhpur also. But his policy towards the Maratha Sardars was that of half-treated conciliation. He granted them with the Sardeshmukhi, but he failed to grant them the Chauth. So this was one weakness of him. If you see, then Bahadur Shah tried to conciliate the rebellious Sikhs, so he tried to conciliate with them. This is one important fact, how Lohagarh is a fort built by Guru Gobind Singh northeast of Ambala at the foothills of the Himalayas. So this is something that we need to note down. Then we have Bahadur Shah was groping towards a solution to the problems, besetting the empire. He might have revived the imperial fortunes, but his death in 1712 plunged the empire once again into civil war. So he could have done something, he could have improved the condition, but he died in 1712. So now a new element enters because of the succeeding wars of succession. Previously, the contest for power had been between royal princes and nobles. Now it was used as princes as mere pawns to capture the seats of authority. In the civil war following Bahadur Shah's death, one of his less able sons, Jahandar Shah, won because he was supported by Zulfikar Khan, the most powerful noble of that time. So Jahandar Shah came to the power. So here when we were writing this as a point, that rise of Sayyid brothers, you can also say Sayyid brothers were just at the time of Farrukh Shiar, but even Zulfikar Khan was there at the time of Jahandar Shah, which made Jahandar Shah an emperor who wasn't deserving. So he was a weak and degenerate prince, wholly devoted to pleasure, lacked good manners, dignity and decency. So if you don't want to go via notes, if you don't want to make notes for yourself, I've marked down the reasons, the problems. See, no destruction of temples, good point. Then control over Rajputs was there. Third point that you can mark is, see, Bahadur Shah was groping towards a solution. However, his death was one of the problem. Then a weak and degenerate prince, again, this was a problem. See, then he rapidly reversed the policies of Aurangzeb. The hated jizya was abolished. Jai Singh of Amir was given the title of Mirza Raja Savai and appointed governor of Malwa. Ajit Singh again here appointed governor of Gujarat. Zulfikar Khan confirmed the earlier private arrangement, that his deputy in the Deccan, and this all is something to read. Zulfikar Khan made an attempt to improve the finances of the empire. How? He started checking the reckless growth of Jagirs and offices. He tried to compel the Mansabdars to maintain the official quotas of troops, and evil tendency encouraged by him was that of ijara or revenue farming. Instead of collecting land revenue at a fixed rate like it was under the Todar Mal's land revenue settlement, government began to contract with revenue farmers and middlemen to pay the government a fixed amount of money, and they were left free to collect whatever they could from the peasants. This led to increased oppression. So the oppression to the peasants even started in the Mughal era. This is what this is about. Then we come to Farrukh Shiar. See, Farrukh Shiar owed his victory to the Sayyid brothers, Abdullah Khan and Hussain Ali Khan. What happens? He lacked the capacity to rule, cowardly, cruel, undependable and faithless. Allowed himself to be influenced by worthless favorites and flatterers. But what happens is, that in spite of his weaknesses, Farrukhsi are not willing to give the Sayyid brothers a free hand. Sayyid brothers were convinced that administration could be carried on properly, the decay of the empire checked, and their own position safeguarded only if they wielded real authority and the emperor merely reigned without ruling. So if you see colonial rule, the British people could do it, but even Mughals had thought of it. People in the Mughal era also had thought of it. Thus, they ensued a prolonged struggle for power between Emperor Farrukhsiyar and his vizier, year after year, ungrateful emperor, to overthrow the two brothers. However, in the end, Sayyid brothers deposed and killed him. So, Farrukhsiyar was killed, and they raised to the throne in quick succession two young princes who again died of consumption, Rafi'ud-Darjat and Rafi'ud-Dawla. Come to Muhammad Shah. He was the emperor of India. Three successors of Farrukhsiyar were mere puppets in the hands of Sayyid. Even their personal liberty to meet people and to move around was restricted. So when we move further, we'll see that Nawab of Bengal were ruined to this post, the mere puppets in the hands of British, in the hands of colonial rule. And the same thing was here in the Mughal era before the colonial people entered. So Sayyid brothers, what did they do? See, they adopted the policy of religious tolerance, sought to conciliate and use the Rajputs, Marathas and Jats. They abolished the jizya immediately after Farrukhsiyar's accession to the throne. Similarly, pilgrim tax was abolished, the same thing that Akbar did, remember? And from a number, they won over to the side Ajit Singh of Marwar, Jai Singh of Amber, and so that means that they had good Rajput relations. However, Sayyid brothers made a vigorous effort to contain rebellions and to save the empire. They failed in these tasks mainly because they were faced with constant political rivalry, quarrels, conspiracies, continued friction in the ruling circles, disorganized and even paralyzed administration. So this was about the Sayyid brothers. Nobles were jealous of the growing power of the two brothers. Murder of the emperor created a wave of public revulsion against the two brothers. They were looked down upon as traitors, and these nobles declared that the Sayyids were following anti-Mughal and anti-Islamic policies. They thus tried. So you see the religion issues, public revolt and everything, that was even then and even today. So they thus tried to arouse the fanatical sections of the Muslims nobility against the Sayyid brothers. Thus, in 1720, succeeded in treacherously assassinating Hussain Ali Khan, younger of the two brothers. Abdullah Khan tried to fight back but was defeated near Agra, and thus ended the domination of the Mughal Empire by the Sayyid brothers, known in Indian history as the Kingmakers. Why Kingmakers? Because they were choosing the king. The king wasn't choosing them. They were choosing the king. They chose Rafi'ud-Dawla, they chose Muhammad Shah and everything. Now comes Muhammad Shah. See, Muhammad Shah's long reign of nearly 30 years was the last chance of saving the empire. No quick changes of imperial authority. See, Mughal army and particularly the Mughal artillery was still a force to reckon with. Administration in northern India had deteriorated but not broken down yet, so there was scope. And a strong and far-sighted ruler supported by a nobility conscious of its peril might still have saved the situation, but Muhammad Shah was not the man of the moment. So this is what we can write when we write unworthy rulers and autocratic rule. We can write about the rule makers, we can write about Muhammad Shah. Then the situation was there, but he couldn't because he was not the man. He was a weak-minded and frivolous and over-fond of a life of ease and luxury. He even shared in the bribes taken by his favorite courtiers, and Nizam-ul-Mulk, the most powerful noble of the time, decided to pursue his own ambition. He had become the vizier in 1722 and had made a vigorous attempt to reform the administration, decided to leave the empire and his emperor to their fate and to strike out his own, relinquished his office and found the state of Hyderabad in the Deccan, and thus started the regional overviews and regional states instead of one empire as a whole. His departure was symbolic of the flight of loyalty and virtue from the empire. Physical breakup of the Mughal Empire had begun. So this is one important point that we can see. Now, everywhere petty zamindars, rajas and nawabs raised the banner of rebellion and independence. The Maratha Sardars began their northern expansion and overran Malwa, Gujarat and Bundelkhand and everything. Nadir Shah was attracted to India by the fabulous wealth. Continual campaigns made Persia virtually bankrupt. So money was needed. Spoils from India could be a solution. And the visible weakness of the Mughal Empire made such plunder possible. Entered Indian territory. So Nadir Shah's invasion can also be one point here. Why? Because initially it was just the insides of the people who knew about Mughal Empire. But after Nadir Shah's invasion, British and other outsiders started knowing about the stand of the Mughal Empire as a weak and a degenerated empire. So, disunity, poor leadership, mutual jealousies, distrusts, and thus two armies met at Karnal on 13 February 1739, and the invader inflicted a crushing defeat on the Mughal army, and thus Mohammed Shah was taken prisoner. Nadir Shah marched on to Delhi. Terrible massacre, total plunder is given, enabled him to exempt his own kingdom from taxation for 3 years. He carried away the famous Kohinoor diamond. As I said, it was last seen with him, and he took it away. Thus, Nadir Shah's invasion inflicted immense damage on the Mughal Empire. It caused an irreparable loss of prestige and exposed the hidden weakness of the empire to the Maratha Sardars and the foreign trading companies. Thus, this is the impact that Nadir Shah had on the defeat when he actually won over the Mughal Empire. As a result of the invasion of Nadir Shah and Abdali and the suicidal internal feuds of the Mughal nobility, Mughal Empire ceased to exist in practice as an all-India empire. It remained merely as a kingdom of Delhi. Delhi itself was the scene of daily riot and tumult, and this is what happened with this. Then came Shah Alam II. With Shah Alam II, it was just, he is only important because he took in with Shuja-ud-Dawla and Mir Qasim of Bengal for the revolt against the English East India Company, but they were defeated by the British at Battle of Buxar, and thus ended the Mughal Emperor. Continuation of the Mughal monarchy after 1759, when it had ceased to be a military power, was due to the powerful hold that Mughal dynasties had on the minds of the people of India as a symbol of the political unity of the country. This is the only reason why the Mughal dynasty continued until Bahadur Shah Zafar and did not end up only there. Then, most important consequence of the decline of the Mughal Empire was that this enabled the British to conquer India. None of the Indian powers rose to claim the heritage of the Grand Mughals because no one was strong. Nobody was there to destroy the British power for the empire, and thus all of them represented the same moribund social system as headed by the Mughals, and all of them suffered from the weakness which had destroyed the mighty Mughal Empire. And on the other hand, Europeans knocking at the gates of India had the benefit of coming from society which had evolved a superior economic system. So at that time, they were going economically very well, and we were declining. Thus, we see what was the tragedy of the Mughal Empire. Go through this chapter in our next video and see. This chapter is very, very long, and I really want to cover it up so well that we don't have to come back again and again towards this. So even if it's taking time, I want to do it really nicely. So let's meet soon.